Perfect.
All right. It had been a long time since I've done live streaming video. It's not since MMA fighting, so I had to find all this old equipment.
All right. Well, we are live here on episode 2 of MMA Media Chat, joined here today by a very special guest, Shaun Al-Shatti, of course, at The Athletic. Thanks so much for joining me, man. How are you?
Oh, of course, man. It's my pleasure. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing well, man. Just like you, trying to survive this quarantine, except I'm being forced to do it. So it's a little bit of a different situation.
Oh, you're being forced. Someone you know have it, or you were?
No, I'm in France. I'm in France, so the whole country kind of went into lockdown. So if we want to leave, we got to fill out the documents. So it's but luckily I'm on a big property, nice farm. So I'm surviving.
It's that stringent? Like you have to actually fill out forms and submit them to be able to leave?
Well, the thing is, at first we had like a form that you could very loosely fill out real quick. Like, listen, I'm going for a walk. I'm going to the grocery store. And, in France, we're known for, we don't listen to anybody. We do whatever we want. So nobody was listening to it. Do you have your papers? I don't know what you're talking about. So now the paper got stricter. If you leave, you got to put the time, signature, 135 euro fine if you don't leave. So yeah, I mean, since we're so close to Italy, they had to ramp everything up. So yeah, it's getting pretty crazy over here.
Man, that's nuts. You got to stay safe out there, brother.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm stuck in here. Classes got switched to online. Luckily for the MMA media stuff, I get to do everything from home. So yeah, there's definitely no going out at this point.
Jeez, man, this is crazy. It's crazy times, man. It really is. We're all just trying to get through this together, right?
Yeah, 100%. All right, so listen, let's get into it a little bit. The people want to know about your journey, so I want to start here first. I know usually on these podcasts, they start with how'd you get into MMA and everything. I'm going to skip through all that. We're going to get straight to how did you get started in MMA media? What was it that sort of where you started kind of getting into it?
Sure, man. Yeah, I feel like I have a weird road, but we all have weird roads in this sport, right? We're all weirdos to some degree. For me, it started in college, man. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a normal teenager who had no clue of the world or really where this was headed. And I rifled through like 50 different majors, probably like 6 or 7 different majors, where I was going to be a lawyer, and then I was going to do political science, and I was going to do all this stuff that sounds so terrible now. And I finally ended up with like, okay, what's one thing I'm good at? And it was, okay, I feel like I'm a good writer. So like whatever that means, let's just pursue that. And so I just ended up in an English degree. And towards the end of my college career, I started realizing that like, this isn't really setting me up for anything. Like after I graduate college, like what's going to happen? So I started to look for just any internship opportunities at all that seemed interesting to me. And one of them was just a random thing I applied for. It was like a Phoenix Suns website on SB Nation. I applied to just be an intern there. Ended up working out, and I was able to cover Arizona sports for like a good semester. And they kept me on afterwards. And at the very end of that internship, I will never forget it, their WEC 53 came to town. It came to Arizona. Final WEC show. Legendary show, probably the greatest final show any MMA event has ever had in history. Showtime kick, just all of it. You look up and down that card, it is just stupid stacked. And I went and covered that because I was the only person on the staff who knew a single thing about MMA, and I was crazy about it. And that was my first live MMA show, and I left that night having just been my mind blown. Like I left that night so confident and aware that whatever the hell I just experienced, that's what I want to be experiencing for the rest of my life. Like, this is it. I found this. And I just managed to get lucky. I really just managed to be in the right place at the right time and kind of sign on to it when it was on the rise.
So first of all, before we go any further, Phoenix Suns, my condolences, man. I'm really sorry. That's gotta be, people talk about the Knicks, but man, the Phoenix Suns, I'm so sorry. I mean, every time it looks like something's good, something's going to happen, nothing. So I'm sorry, man.
Hey, thanks, man. Yeah, it's not fun. It's probably the worst part of my life is being a fan of this stupid team and devoting so much attention to it. People are mad that the basketball season's over, and it's like my basketball season was over.
Right.
Like this doesn't mean anything to me. So it is what it is.
But I mean, to be fair though, I'm a Charlotte Hornets fan because I grew up in North Carolina. So we had.
So you understand. You understand.
Right, 100%. I mean, we had Kemba Walker. Everybody's like, listen, we're a couple pieces, and then Boston was like, nah, we'll go ahead and take that. And so we have Michael Jordan. That's our only positive.
The one of the worst owners in basketball. Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah, he's not very well liked. But listen, so you're covering WEC. You're writing about the Phoenix Suns. At what point do you sign on to a website for MMA? Did you go straight to MMA fighting?
No. So I got really lucky. I had stayed on with this place after my internship. I got a job there and I was just doing Arizona sports. My first beat I officially covered was the WNBA. I did Phoenix Mercury. And it was actually, I didn't really care about the WNBA at the time, but it was actually a really cool experience because there wasn't a lot of media around them. And so you really were able to hone your skills and kind of like immerse yourself in it in a way that I definitely wouldn't have for the NBA because you have all these ingrained guys there. And so going in the locker rooms, that type of thing, it was a good environment to really figure out how to do this on the fly. And then at a certain point, I remembered I was working like 60 different jobs at this point because all these jobs paid nothing, right? Like $50 a month, that type of thing. And so I was just trying to make any ends meet any way possible. And one of the jobs was a news desk job at SB Nation. And so I would get like a 4-hour shift and punch out as many breaking news stories as they needed. And one of the nights, I'll never forget it. It was during the Strikeforce heavyweight tournament. Alistair Overeem withdrew from the tournament. The UFC snatched him, and nobody on the news desk at all knew anything about MMA. Again, I'm just kind of like lucking into this stuff because it's such a small sport. Nobody knew anything about this. So I was like, oh no, like this is super easy. I'll write this. And I wrote out just the news piece about Alistair Overeem's out of this tournament. It took me 20 minutes and submitted it. And I always bust his balls about this every time I see him. But Luke Thomas at the time was my good buddy Luke Thomas. He was the head of the MMA side. And East Coast, obviously, he's already asleep at this point. He doesn't know any of this is happening. He wakes up, and I wake up the next day, and I have an email in my inbox from Luke Thomas. And I'm going to censor it a little bit, but it was more or less like, you effing mother effer, who do you think you are, posting some story on my website, blah, blah, blah. Like, don't ever do that again type of thing. And so I'm just some kid who like wants to do this. So like, I wake up to this. I don't know how to respond to this. So I just kind of sent him back like, hey man, I'm really sorry. Like I was just kind of following orders, but like, you know, shot in the dark. If anything ever comes up and you never need anybody who really knows a lot about this, like I love this sport and I would just do anything for almost no money, basically, like just hire me and give me a shot. And I ended up, somehow that worked. They were in the process of making a new MMA site called MMA Nation with like him and Jonathan Snowden and Nate Wilcox. And I was able to get on that as the one news just churner. So like I would just do like a 9 a.m. to like 5 p.m. shift every single day and just write as many stories as possible. I'll do like, 12, 14 stories, just quick news stories for the website. And then SB Nation ended up buying MMA Fighting while I was doing that. And I begged and pleaded to get along on the transfer because Luke was going to go over there. And they were like, dude, nobody knows you. Like, why would we bring you? And it really ultimately came down to Luke negotiated to where like you bring Shaun if he has a good idea. And I was able to come up with the morning report, which they're still doing over at MMA Fighting. And it was just kind of like a morning wrap up of the previous day. And it ended up getting super popular. And so that was kind of my window into that. And I really just like, again, right place, right time. It was, I was really lucky that it worked out the way it did.
The funny thing about Luke Thomas, I think when people think of Luke Thomas, like an extreme version of him is that email. Like that's the kind of person people think he is behind the scenes.
Yeah, man. I've told that story a couple of times. And the last time I told it, I went back and I actually tried to like search through my inbox and find that email.
Yeah,
and it took me a while. I ended up finding it, and it's gold. It's still as ridiculous as it was from day one, and I will never let him live that down.
For sure. How was that the first time talking to him? I assume over the phone or something like that. Was there still some tension, or was it like he'd accepted that you weren't going anywhere?
Oh no, he pushed to get me onto the website as soon as because he had went back and actually read the Overeem whatever news story I wrote, and he realized like I'm not an idiot, that like I kind of follow it, and immediately like as soon as he hit me, he emailed me back like, actually, sorry, like I got a little excited there, like let's restart. I'd actually be interested in bringing you on for this type of thing.
And so at this point, how are you as a writer? Like, is it fair to say you were very good, like better than a lot of people? I assume your experience in college helped. I mean, how were you as a writer?
I mean, anybody who knows me knows that's probably not the right question to ask me because I feel like I'm a terrible writer. Even right now, I feel like I'm not a very good writer, and I'm probably the hardest on myself. I know a lot of writers who are hard on themselves, so I shouldn't say that, but I am extraordinarily hard on myself to the point where I will actually ruin my life over the course of writing some of these pieces. Like some of the more involved ones where It's like long forms and things like that where you really spend like a month or two on them. My poor wife, she's an angel because I put her through some moody, miserable hell sometimes trying to do these where I just get so deep into my head because you read these like 4,000 times over the course of doing them. And I'm just, every time I'm convinced that this is the worst thing I've ever written and I'm a pretender and eventually somebody's going to see me out as a fraud and all of this. And then it posts and people generally will like it. And it's like, okay, maybe I'm just being dramatic. So I don't know. I still feel like I'm a terrible writer. I sure back then I thought I was a terrible writer. If I go back and read any of my early stuff back then, I cringe doing it. So I don't know, I guess.
So you joined MMA Nation. Luke Thomas brings you along and everything. You're doing the morning report and this writing up news. What's the turning point for you at this point in your career?
So I think, well, the turning point was definitely being able to get to MMA fighting because then that team at that point was unreal. It was Ariel, it was Luke, it was Ben Folks, it was like Michael David Smith and Ray Huey and like all the original guys, Mike Chiappetta. And so I was just like a kid amongst giants in there. So just being able to sort of like through osmosis really suck up a lot of the talent and just like watch everything, like how do people approach stuff, that type of thing. It was incredible for me. And after the morning report pretty consistently got to a point where it was like one of the more popular stories on the website every day. The boss over there, Brian Tucker, started to show a little more faith and support that, like, okay, this guy kind of knows what he's doing. Let's start letting him do other things. And I remember the turning point actually probably because it was one championship had just become a thing. They had just started. And so it was easy to talk to one championship fighters for someone like me who has no contacts at that point. Like it was easy to get some stories about them. And I did 2 stories for them over the course of maybe a couple of weeks. One was on Jens Pulver and one was on Phil Baroni. And both of these fighters over the course of our interview really like, it was like a really emotional interview for both of them about like the places they were in their career. And they kind of like were near the end of their career, but they weren't satisfied with it. And I was able to write like 2 pieces that at the time I felt really proud of and put a lot of time and energy into. And I think that was sort of the turning point for me where it's just like, okay, like if I sit down and really focus on this, I think I can be good at this.
And so today we know you, of course, for the long forms, which is especially what we know you for the Athletic. Are those interviews kind of how the long form started? I mean, how did this process come for you at that point?
I don't know, man. I mean, people always ask me that, and it's weird because I never really saw that as me being that person, and then it just kind of happened. But like it makes sense because that's how I grew up, right? Like I grew up reading Sports Illustrated every single week when it would come out. I would get it in my mailbox as a kid, and I would just pour through it that night. And I loved the long stories, the Gary Smith stuff. Like I have basically every book Gary Smith's ever written, and all these guys, Frank DeFord, and all the legends back then when I think journalism was a little different, right? Like people were given time to be able to do these fleshed out stories. It's a little harder to come by these days, which is why it's cool we're doing it at The Athletic. But it was just, I guess it was in me from the beginning because that's kind of what the journalism that I grew up reading and enjoying. And I always wanted to emulate it to some degree. And I don't think I realized that I was trying to do that until I actually got to that point. I was doing it at MMA Fighting. And I remember my first really big one was something about Jonathan Brookins. And it ended up being about him and his trip to India and all this. And I remember just finishing that and feeling really, really good about it. And there wasn't a lot of people doing that in MMA at all at that time. So I feel like succeeding in MMA, especially these days, is about finding your niche and finding what you can do that nobody else is really doing. And for me, that was basically all I could do that nobody else was really doing.
And so at this point, as you're covering MMA, when did you go full time? Was this with MMA Nation? Was this before that? At what point did you go full time?
So I went full time with MMA Nation, but full time for me at that point meant, full time for me at that point meant $100 a month. So I was just in a point where I am going to lose money every month, and I'm going to live as best I can off my savings, and I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to give myself a year or two. And at this point, like if it's not going to work, it's not going to work after that. But I really just tried to commit to it. Like I'm going to work as hard as possible at this, no matter if I'm getting paid good money or not. And I'm just going to try to make it work. And it's probably not until like year 3 when I was actually making even just enough money to just like live off of the money that I was making And I feel like that's a lot of people's stories. Like there's a lot of people, I'm sure you can relate, where it just takes a long time to find like some level of like just a place where you're like, okay, like this, I can do this now. And it's a really difficult sport in that regard.
And so at MMA Fighting, when you left, of course, we knew you were one of the big editors over there. You were doing the A side and stuff like that. I mean, take us through that journey through MMA Fighting, because obviously a lot of stuff happened in that period.
Yeah. What do you mean? I guess overall or towards the end?
I mean, you start as a writer. At what point do the things start elevating into the position that you got there, towards the end?
I mean, that's a good question. I guess for me, I don't know. It just kind of felt like a natural evolution. Like I grew into myself as a person, as an adult. I kind of just figured out who I was, my voice as a writer. And slowly I started getting more and more responsibilities. They started sending me out to keep knocking that down. They started sending me out to different events and things like that. And I feel like it's just the slow and steady evolution, right? Eventually you prove that you can do this. And so they're going to see, can you do this? And it was just, I always wanted to be the guy who, if you have anything that you need done, tell me, I'll do it. And I'll try to do it to the best of my abilities. And if I'm bad at it, I'll keep trying until I'm good at it. That type of thing. And so, yeah, it just kind of slowly escalated. I mean, I started as a staff writer, got promoted. Eventually, by the time I left, I was, the senior editor, like managing editor.
And so what leads to you being promoted? Is it just that we can count on this guy to make content? Is it we know that whatever he makes is good and consistent? I mean, what is it that's leading to these promotions?
I mean, I guess that's a question for my bosses. I can't really tell you, but certainly for me, I know it's some level, especially as now having worked as an editor in that kind of capacity, it's just people need to be able to trust that you're going to do something and do it the right way. If you say you're going to do it, that you're going to get it done. You're going to get it done when they need it to get done, but also that it's going to be done at a high level. Because it is very easy in today's sports media climate to just phone stuff in. And I'm not going to say I haven't done that, because obviously I have, everybody has, but you don't want to do it too much, right? If you get to the point where you are known as the person who is phoning it in, who's going to just be turning in generic work, generic stories, generic content, it's hard for that to get outside of, it's hard for that to get the attention that you'd want it to, right? Like things need to be unique in MMA for them to really succeed. And I think that's something even I struggle with today, is just trying to figure out like, what's the unique angle? What's the unique way to do this? What's the way that's not going to be homogenized by everybody else?
And so you mentioned, putting everything into it for a year or two. If you hadn't done that, do you think you'd be at the position where you are today? Like if you had a job on the side and you were trying to juggle it, do you think you'd still have this level of success?
Oh, no way. And it sucks, because I know some people can't put themselves in that spot where they can just basically lose money for several years in a row. But I was lucky that when I was in college, I had a job that paid decently, and I didn't really spend a lot of money. So I was able to accrue some level of savings that I kind of lived off of for like a couple years. But no, because I mean, even during those times where I'm making $100 a month, I'm still working 40, 50 hours a week doing MMA, just grinding these out, trying to make any impression I can, trying to make any contacts I can. And I think that would have been severely hampered and limited, really, if I hadn't just been able to commit my entire day and my entire life to it.
And the thing about this show is a lot of people, they like to hear about the mistakes people make and stuff. Luckily, I've made so many of them that every episode I'll have something I can add. But I want to start with you. As you're growing and everything, what are some of the biggest mistakes? Like looking back on it, it's like, man, if we could have just avoided that, things could have been so much better.
Oh, man, that's a hell of a question. I don't know. So for me, I certainly have a lot of I certainly have a lot of interviews and things like that where I look back on them and it's just you didn't capitalize on this opportunity in the way that you should have, that sort of thing. A lot of opportunities like that, whether it was video or written, a lot of things that I would have liked to have done better, that I would have wanted a second shot at. And I think one of the lessons that I've sort of learned throughout this over the course of those mistakes is just like the value of preparation. Because I remember, I'll just give you an example. I remember the second time I ever did a video preview show for MMA Fighting. The first time I ever did one, it was in Seattle. It was Benson Henderson and Nate Diaz. And I did an insane amount of preparation for my first ever on-camera role like that. Like I had never done that. I didn't go to school for that. I didn't understand how to do that. No one ever told me how to do that. You kind of just get thrown in and you're going to figure out if you can sink or swim. and I did okay. Like I haven't watched it in forever, but as the YouTube comments were, it's all calling me an asshole and an idiot. So like
That's pretty good.
that. By the way, can I swear on this?
Yeah, of course. Come on, man.
Okay. But yeah, YouTube comments weren't all just shitting on me. So it's just like, okay, at least I was able to escape that.
Right.
And so I got a weird level of irrational confidence that I shouldn't have from that. And so the second time, and if you ever ask Casey Layden, our cameraman over at MMA Fighting about this, he could tell you. The second time I ever did a video preview was a Cain Velasquez JDS fight. I think it may be the second fight. It could be the third. I'm not sure. And I did no preparation because I was just like, oh, I got this. Like I already did this. I'm good at this. And I went into there and poor Casey had to shoot this thing. It was supposed to be like a 15-minute show. I think it took us like an hour to get through because I could not even just handle straight sentences. Like Ariel, I don't know how Ariel didn't leave that day and just call up our boss and be like, yo, you need to never send this guy out again. Because I made a stop and restart so many damn times because of how just terrible it was going and how little preparation I had done. And it got to the point where once you're kind of going downhill on these side of things, they get worse and worse and worse, and you kind of get stuck within your own momentum. And it got to the point where like I was almost close to like breaking down and just like crying almost of just like, I can't do this. And somehow Casey saved the video. He was able to cobble together like 10 good minutes from it. And you couldn't tell like if you watch it, but if you ask him or Ariel or Esther, or anybody who was there, they will laugh hysterically at how terrible I used to be at that. So preparation, as I guess to go back around, preparation is the one thing that I've learned throughout this.
Yeah, last time we were on the show with Mike Heck, I talked about one of the big mistakes I was making was being, way too eager, like, hitting up these websites when I'd done like 3 articles and I was like a glorified fan and harassing people into eventually blocking me so that I'd stop harassing them. For this one, the thing is, when I started doing video, I was working on a laptop that was not up to par, and webcam wasn't as good as it should be. So you mentioned not phoning in content. The videos weren't as good as they should be. I look at it now where I'm a lot happier with the content now that I have better material. But at first, it's like you're making a lot of content, but if it's all shit, then it's for nothing. So I look at that back then, and it's like it wasn't for nothing. But when you compare it today, it's like that's really wouldn't take me anywhere if I continue. So my thing, the big mistake is if you're gonna make content, do it right, and just don't do it like me. Don't half-ass it. Get the right materials and learn from my mistakes. But
absolutely, and really quick to jump in. I mean, reps.
Yeah.
Reps. There is no replacement in the world for reps. If you can as long as you can get your reps in, that is going to help you in any way, shape, or form, regardless of if it's bad, regardless of if you feel you didn't do well. Every single time you do something, it just helps you a little bit more the next time. And for someone who like me, who wasn't used to doing video and didn't want to ever do video, that was something that really took me a long time to be able to even feel remotely comfortable to do, just because I had to get the reps. And so that kind of speaks to what you're saying.
100%. I mean, like for the interviews, the way they came out is definitely not the way it should have came out. I feel like it could have done better. But you know what? The fact there were the reps in, I learned how to do interviews with no questions. Try to build a better bond with whoever you're talking to. And it also got the connections. Like now you know how to contact certain fighters. And if the interview went well, you can contact them again. So it wasn't for nothing. But in terms of if a website were to look back at it, it wouldn't really do that much to help you at that point, unfortunately. But listen, as you're working out with one of the biggest websites and you're working with Ariel Helwani. Everybody looks at him, he's a legend, MMA media guy. What's it like working with Ariel? Take us a little bit behind the scenes.
My guy, man. I love that guy so much. Ariel is my boy. I think there are 2 people in this industry who I owe my entire career to, and one is Luke and one is Ariel. They are really the reason I'm able to do this and support my family through this and really live a life that I didn't expect just doing sports media. Ariel's one of the nicest, most incredible dudes I've ever met in my entire life. That guy has helped me through so much, and he's also one of the smartest people I've ever met when it comes to just generating content ideas. Anytime I was lost for like, I don't have a project I could work on, I don't really have any ideas, a conversation with him that would be 10 minutes long would give me 3 or 4 or 5 different ideas of just things I could do. He is genuinely one of the most, again, hardworking, but also just he has one of the best minds in this industry when it comes to just the promotional side of it and figuring out unique angles and what people could like and what people would be interested in. And he is always, like, as far as my experience, he has never once turned down any request from me ever in regards to like, can you help me with this? Can you help me with this? Even if I'm not working with him, like we're not teammates anymore. And I still know I could hit that dude up at any point in any day and just ask him for something, and he would 100% do it for me. So I love that guy, man. I owe him so much.
And so what was the reaction like when you guys found out he was going to ESPN? I assume at one point you're happy for him, but everybody, you know, on the outside was like, oh man, they must be panicking and sweating. What was the reaction like when he left for ESPN?
Yeah, man, that was tough. I knew ahead of time that like a couple months before that was a possibility. Me and him had some conversations about like, what would you think if I did this? And you know, like obviously you want to support your friend, and ESPN is ESPN. But when it actually happened, I think at the time it was the higher up version of MMA fighting was Ariel, Luke, me, and Mark. And that was kind of just like the senior staff at that point, and obviously Esther and Casey. And none of us are Ariel, right? Like I had engineered my whole career around fitting to everybody else's skill sets on the team. So like I never tried to be the reporter breaking news because Ariel's doing that. I never tried to be the video interviewer because Ariel's doing that. And so if Ariel's all of a sudden leaving like he was, it was definitely scary in the moment, because I know Mark, same thing. He's never tried. At that point in his career, he had never tried to be that guy who's going to be the video interviewer and the reporter. Same with Luke. And so we just had to all come together, man, and try to figure it out. And I'm actually really proud of, because we only got a chance to do it for a year before Mark left and I left and Luke left and everybody. But I am really proud of the year that we put in, because I feel like I grew a lot as a journalist, as a reporter, as a video person, just as an interviewer, everything, just trying to figure out and fill this hole that was, because Ariel does like 40 jobs. And so you can't, like, nobody else is going to be able to do that. So you kind of all have to piecemeal it. And I think we did a really good job while we were there, but it was definitely scary for immediately it was scary. And then it was still scary like 6 months in, like we're still figuring things out on the fly 6 months in. Like I never in my life ever wanted to do video interviews ever. And all of a sudden I'm sitting here holding a mic at Media Day saying, you know, this is Shaun Al-Shatti at MMA Fighting, or from MMA Fighting at Media Day, doing all this. So it was all very foreign to me.
For sure. When you left, one of the things you were doing was the A-Side live chat, which I think a lot of people enjoyed. How did the show come up? Was that an idea you guys had? Or how did that happen?
No, so I mean, that was Luke. Like Luke had done the promotional malpractice live chat for us on Fighting, and it was super popular. And when Ariel left, obviously Luke ended up moving up and doing the MMA hour. And so he wasn't going to do both shows. And so Mark and I knew at this point, like I said, we were going to have to be thrust really hard out of our comfort zone. And so we just came together and we're like, dude, do you want to just tag team this? And we'll do the live chat and we'll get 1,000 reps doing this, and it'll probably suck and it'll probably be bad, but at least we'll like get better as hosts and video, everything like that in the process of doing it. And so we just we had no idea what we were doing. We just kind of winged it and figured out a ton of stuff on the fly. And I actually think that year of doing that was insanely valuable for me, because I had never hosted anything. I had never seen myself as that person ever. And I just really had to figure it out. And again, there's no replacement for reps. And that was really helpful for that.
And so I remember watching that last episode with you and Mark where we knew Mark was leaving, and everybody's like, oh God, Shaun's got to be devastated. The whole comment section is crying. What was it like shooting that episode? Was it as sad as it seemed, or was it even worse than it looked like?
Dude, that was rough. Because at that point, there was no indication that I was leaving too. Because like all of that happened very quickly after Mark left. So at that point, like I'm losing one of my buddies, right? Like I just lost one of my best friends in this industry with Ariel leaving the year before, and now I'm losing another buddy. And it was weird, man. It was definitely weird. And I think the live aspect of it is very, I don't know. It's strange to think about when you're doing it, because you're right. Me and Mark are sitting here looking at each other like we're looking at each other now. And we kind of know what's happening and what's going to happen and how things are going to change. And he's trying not to cry and I'm trying not to cry, but you also don't want to end up being a meme on the internet.
Right.
And so it was tough, man. That was a really, really tough show to do, for sure.
And so I do remember with the show, you put your email out there telling people, if you want to work for MMA Fighting, go ahead and email me. Yeah. What did that inbox look like? Because I was like, anybody who's ever watched a fight has emailed you, and I assume reading the emails isn't even happening at that point.
Yeah. So I I'm glad I did this beforehand because like I kind of figured that might be the turnout. So I created a separate email address.
Oh, okay.
And because like if that was my
That's my
normal
move.
email, yeah, dude, if that was my normal email address, that would have been a bad time for me because the next like 2 weeks were just every 10 minutes. If I would have checked, it's like another 20 emails. It was crazy the amount of people who were reaching out, trying to work for MMA fighting at that time. And it's funny because like 90% of them had never done anything in media or never gone to school for it or never tried anything or even had like a single piece of content to show me. So like 90% of the emails were horribly misspelled, no grammar, no nothing, of just like, hey, like I enjoy watching fights. Can you pay me? Like type of thing. And so weeding through that was not a fun process, but it's not the biggest deal.
So I know there's a lot of people that watch this as an editor that are curious about, what were you looking for in those emails? What were the things that caught your eye and you were like, you know what, let's put him to the side and let's check back on it later. Like, what were the things you were looking out for in those emails?
So that was a very specific point in time for the website, right? Because we were losing Mark, we had already lost Ariel, and so we really needed to fill a couple holes. So at that point in time, when I'm going through those emails, what I was very specifically looking for was someone with reporting experience, someone with video experience, someone who had a Rolodex of some sort, contacts, where not someone that we were going to have to treat as sort of new, right? Like someone who we could bring in and they were already an established figure and not someone who we would basically have to raise them from the ground up. Because obviously that is a wonderful thing to be. And that's how we all get our start. That's how I got my start, everybody else. But at that point in time, that's not really what the website needed. We needed more established figures. So in that way, that was kind of the rubric that we were using, is just like, how can this person improve us on day one, not on year 3, that type of thing.
And so, so MMA fighting happens, and then I get on Twitter one day, and all of a sudden, everybody's leaving their websites. Everybody's joining the Athletic. They're putting together this dream team, the Michael Jordans of MMA writing, everything like that. It's all happening all at once. And I was reading an article about the Athletic and kind of how that phone call goes, where basically they're like, "You're coming. We're not taking no for an answer." And apparently, they're really convincing. But tell me a little bit about how the Athletic happened. How did that phone call happen for you?
I mean, I don't want to go too much into it, but
right.
It was an interesting process, right? Because again, at least personally where I was in my life, like, I don't know, everybody leaving MMA fighting was starting to get weird. And I was in a weird point just personally with myself with a couple different things. And so, yeah, I mean, they call you and they definitely know how to talk to you if you're a writer. Like they call you and just be like, when's the last time you wrote something that you're ultra proud of? And if you don't have an immediate answer, like they will get you, man. They are good salesmen over there. I'll tell you that.
But so what was it about their pitch? Like, without going too much into, but was there one thing they said in particular where in your mind it was just like, okay, yes, like I have to do it? Like, was there something in particular for that?
Well, I think there were 2 things for me. One was the team that they told me that they were trying to put together. You got guys like obviously my boy Chuck Mindenhall, who I've been with throughout this whole ride, but then you got guys like Ben Folks, Chad Dundes, Josh Gross, Fernanda Pratchett, like all these incredible writers. And it's just like, all right, like that's immediately appealing to me as a writer. But also it was the idea that their sales pitch was basically like, do you think that this can be done outside of the hamster wheel that we were all in? Because we were very much at a I don't want to say content farm type of websites, but that's kind of what the space is now, is quantity over quality. And so they wanted to know, like, do you think this could be done without having to do 40 things about UFC Alabama that's happening on Saturday and then reset and do it again next week and then reset and do it again the next week, like do longer stuff and longer term type of things. And I mean, obviously that's like my wheelhouse. That's what I would always wanted to have done. And at that point, I hadn't done anything like that for a long time because the way that sort of the website changed with fighting and the demands of what they needed. So that was just appealing to me. I think the idea of, okay, like I know this is going to be hard and it's probably going to be the hardest thing I've ever done, but I would feel probably bad the rest of my life and wonder what it would have been like had I not tried that. So it was just, I needed to do this for me,
And so we know with MMA fans, they'll complain about a paywall. They'll pay for people's podcasts on Patreon, but I guess paying for good articles isn't going to happen. Were you worried about joining behind a paywall that you've built up sort of a fan base at this point? I mean, people are following your work specifically. Were you worried that people were, I don't want to say forget about you, but because of the paywall, not everybody was going to follow your work at The Athletic?
Man, I wasn't at the time. I definitely didn't think about it, and probably to a fault, because you're right. Life behind a paywall is significantly different than life behind a free site. It's a lot harder to get traction with things you content you produce. It's a lot harder, just even on social media. Stupid anecdotal example, but like if I tweeted an article at Fighting, it would be much easier to get people to retweet it or favorite it or comment or whatever than if I tweeted an article at The Athletic, because large percentage of people can't read it. And so it's just that sort of thing. It's almost like having to detach yourself from caring too much about that, because I know for me, my first initial few months, and I've talked to other people at The Athletic too, kind of went through this same process where it does bother you a lot for the first few months, because you're just not used to this. And everything you tweet out, everything you write, you get 40 comments of like, well, I would love to read this if you could let me, type of thing. And just people getting really indignant about it. And it's like, I understand, especially in MMA. I think MMA is a little different, because like basketball, a lot of basketball fans seem to have embraced The Athletic. MMA is a little different. Like we're paying for so much already. We pay for Fight Pass, ESPN Plus, pay for pay-per-views every month. Like we're just already paying a shitload of money in this sport. So I understand the idea of asking you to pay more money to read articles, which is foreign to some people, even though that's what we all used to do. Like I used to pay for magazine subscriptions and shit. I know that's a hard bridge to cross for a lot of people. So it really, like, I just had to get to a point in my head where it's just like, like you can't stress out about this. Like just focus on the work, do good work. Eventually people will read it. If they want to read it, if they don't want to read it, that's fine too. You just can't ruin your headspace over this. And so it took me like probably a couple months to get over that, but I don't know. At this point, it is what it is. Like if I write an article and somebody tweets me like, well, I wish I could love to read this. It's just like, dude, I can't even give that a second,
Yeah, for sure. But the big thing when you join The Athletic is they're like, we're going to make unique content. Everything's going to be unique outside the box. How much pressure does that put on you as a writer? Because now you can't just talk about, like you mentioned, UFC Alabama. You got to find these stories, the veterans that did something. I mean, this, you're really going to have to put your creative thinking cap on.
Yeah, that was something too that I hadn't, I did expect, but the reality of it is a little different than when you're just thinking about it. Because you're right, man, there's not really, they don't really take mailed in pieces. Like if you're just going to do something generic, they're going to just be like, nah, we're cool, man. Like send this back. So there is a weird pressure that kind of comes with that, but also I enjoy it. That's kind of the challenge of all of this. And that's kind of what gets me going, is the idea of like trying to figure out what would be an interesting story or what would be maybe an angle nobody else has done. That's what gets me going. So as a writer, like it took a while for me to wean back into that and really embrace that again. Because by the time I left Fighting, I wasn't really even writing anymore. I was just doing so many other things. Took a bit to catch back up to that, but now I love it, man. Like I feel like I'm just constantly trying to think of ideas every moment, every day, and I'm just keeping a running log of like stuff and things like that.
And so when you come up with something, what's the process like? Do you have to call, I assume, your editor, kind of pitch the story to him? I mean, what's it like at that point?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same as anything else. You just constant communication with your editor, just being like, hey, man, what do you think of this? And then he'll say something back and we'll kind of just flesh out the idea. It's pretty similar as anything else.
And so I assume with these features, you're doing a lot of interviews, doing something quite awful and transcribing. Absolutely hate it. Got to put that out there. But what's the most... What's the most hoops you've had to jump through for a feature? Because I assume you got to talk to, coaches, fighters, everyone. What's the most hoops you've had to jump through for a story?
Oh, man, the most hoops. Probably the most hoops are anytime I do the Night We Faced type of stories, where like I've done one on Jose Aldo, I've done one on Nate Diaz, I did Michael Bisping. So the Bisping one is probably the best example. That was the most hoops I've ever had to jump through ever to do a story. And I think I ended up with something like 30 interviews. And each interview was like 30 minutes to an hour. And
oh yeah. Oh God, the transcribing.
Dude, the way I do these pieces, I want every single word that was spoken in that interview to be available to me. And so I just transcribed the entire interview.
Oh no.
And exactly, like transcribing 30 minutes is probably like for me like a 2-hour, 3-hour thing.
God, I'm sweating right now.
So you got to imagine like transcribing 30 different 1-hour interviews at a certain point. Like I think for the Bisping thing, at a certain point, I had a document that was like 100,000 words, and it was just the quotes. And it was just like, okay, now I get to start going through these. So those ones are definitely the most involved because there's just so much to go through and try to pick out the good parts.
And so, what's your typical day look like for you working at the Athletic? I think people imagine you in a Starbucks with a laptop, kind of doing like the screenplay type of thing. But what's it look like? Are you just thinking of content all day? Are you on your computer all day? What's a typical day look like for you?
Man, I can't work in public worth shit. I cannot. Like I can't focus. If there's just anything at all going on around me, like I can't work. Like I really guys like Mark, who really good buddy of mine, he Mark Ramundi, he's able to work no matter what's going on. And he'll just punch out like an article in 20 minutes with chaos going on around him. And it's like that would take me so long. Like I would never be able to do that. So I just, I have to stay home. I have an office. I'm inside my office right now. I kind of close it off. My wife goes to work for the day. We have no kids, so luckily I don't have to deal with that yet. And I have 3 dogs, but they're very quiet for the most part and kind of just chill out throughout the house. And I just try to do as much as I can, right? Like just try to sit in here until I can't sit in here anymore, and just pile out as much content as possible.
For sure. Let's end it with this right here. I'm sure a lot of people watching this would like your wisdom from where you were as an editor and things like that. What's like the biggest piece of advice you can give to the people that are up and coming in this industry and that are hoping to do this full time someday, or trying to get to a position where you are at?
I think 2 things. One is patience. It's almost frustrating how few jobs are available in this industry, and actual like how few even among those will actually be like a full-time job that could support you through your life. There's very, very, very few of those available, and they don't become available very often. So patience is one, because it does just take some time, man. You're going to struggle for like a long time. Like I did it. I know everybody else did it. Like you're just probably not going to make a lot of money and not be able to do this full time for a long time. So patience is one, but also just finding that niche, man. That really is the most important thing that I've discovered, or at least in my experience, and I know others as well, is finding that niche of what you're really good at in a way that nobody else is really good at it. Because everybody can do the news articles to some degree. Everybody can do, the generic things that we all like that need to get done. They're not bad. I'm not shitting on them by any means, but they're also replaceable to some degree. So you need to figure out what about you is not replaceable. What about you is very unique. And for some people, that's I'm going to grind as hard as possible and be the best reporter on the planet, break fights and do all this. For some people, it's I'm going to just be super hardcore into commissions. That for Mark, that was kind of his entry into it. It was just I'm going to own this beat. I'm just going to be the best commission guy possible. For someone like me, it's like I'm just going to be good at long forms, aerial video interviews, that type of thing. Like there's just so many things available in this space that for people to do. Is just really about honing in your craft on what you are the best at, and nobody else can be good at it. And if you make yourself that type of valuable figure, eventually somebody will find you and want you to be a part of what they're doing.
So much good stuff. So many things to unpack. Thank you for the time. I really appreciate it. But let the people know, where can we find you on social media? And something that I'm sure you're asked all the time: why should we subscribe to The Athletic?
Oh man, I live that question. So I'm on social media at Shaun Al-Shatti. I know it says Shaheen, but I got stuck with Shaun, and now the Shaheen Al-Shatti on Twitter. He's just some dude that doesn't use Twitter and hasn't for like 5 years, so I can't get that tag. So at Shaun Al-Shatti. Why subscribe to The Athletic? I don't know. Subscribe to The Athletic because we're trying to do something a little different, and we're not going to tell you what Conor McGregor ate for lunch or if Brock Lesnar farted in his pants. We're going to just try to actually put some work into something and really give you deep dives into different corners of the industry, different corners of the history of the industry, just hopefully unique angles, different coverage than we're used to seeing.
So we do have a comment here from someone, Drake Riggs, asking me to take off the hat and embrace not having hair. So just for you, man.
You got to, man.
Man, but it's not on purpose.
Oh,
I put the guard wrong on the clippers. I was like, quarantine, give myself a haircut. And believe it or not, it was even shorter than this. So I'm still trying to live without having as much hair as usual. So it's
man,
it's been tough.
My man, you got a hairline. You're fine. Like I had this hairline when I was like 20, dude. Like I literally, just a quick story. When I was just out of high school, so I was maybe like 18, I went to get a haircut at Great Clips, and I sat down and this woman started cutting my hair. And then halfway through, she was like, you're going to be bald pretty soon. And it's just like, dude, I'm like 18. This is not something that you tell an 18-year-old boy.
Right. Yeah.
And she was right. Like within like 18 months, I was like this. And so it's just like, dude, you gotta embrace it. Like I'm lucky that I don't have a weird shaped head, because like you just gotta embrace it. If you fight it, it looks so much worse.
Yeah. That's such a shitty thing to say. I mean, first of all, I came into Great Clips for a haircut. Like, just let me be, in Great
Dude, right?
Clips without telling me about my hairline and stuff. That's come on.
Like I'm paying you. Just like
Right.
I'm not coming here for that. I'm not trying to get roasted. Like,
Yeah,
come
you're not
on.
at a barber shop. Like Great Clips that's the safe place. Like a barber shop, fair game, but Great Clips, like if we're not safe there, we're not safe anywhere.
Oh man, I don't know that I've gotten a haircut since that. Like that scarred me.
You went home, bought your own clippers.
Dude, really, I just shave it myself now. That's all I need.
Oh man. Well, thank you to whoever it was, I guess, that cut your hair and that pushed you into saving money on not getting haircuts at this point.
That's a good point. True that.
All right. So listen, thank you anybody who watched. We really appreciate it. Lots of good stuff, Shaun. I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. It's my pleasure. Anytime.